What I'm going to be talking about in this lecture is an organization, Amnesty International. And I know that some of you have heard of this organization, and others of you haven't. Some of you have heard about it from me, others of you haven't. Well, let me start with some details about the organization. It was founded in 1961, and what it is, it's one of the largest and most active human rights organizations. In 1998, it had 1,100,000 members, and these members were spread out among about 160 countries, so it's very international. In 1977, it was given the Nobel Peace Prize, and in 1978, it was given an award by the United Nations for outstanding achievement in the field of human rights. So it's very, very well known, very widespread, and quite recognized. It's concerned strictly with prisoners, and I'll tell you a little more about that. It seeks the release of what they call prisoners of conscience. They seek the release of these prisoners of conscience, and the way they define the term is they say it's any person who is detained for the nonviolent expression of political or religious beliefs, or because of color, ethnic origin, race, or sex. And I'll repeat that definition for you because I'd like you to get that. They seek the release of all prisoners of conscience. And the way they define prisoners of conscience is any person who is detained for the nonviolent expression of political or religious beliefs, or because of color, ethnic origin, race, or sex. They also do a couple of other things on behalf of prisoners. They work for fair trials within reasonable time periods for all political prisoners. They also work to protect all people from torture because they believe that no one has the right or no one should be tortured. And finally, they work for the abolition of the death penalty. That is, they're against the death penalty. Okay, as I said before, this organization has been very, very successful and has earned high international respect among a wide range of countries. Not just West, not just East, but worldwide. Okay? What I'm specifically going to focus on in this lecture, now that I've told you a little bit about the organization, are some of the specific principles that underlie some of Amnesty International's activities and probably contribute to its success. Okay? And there are 8 principles in particular that I'm going to talk about. Okay. The first principle is that it has a limited mandate, and that is, it has a limited field of authority. It doesn't try to do too much. It limits its field of work. So as you might have noticed, it doesn't act in respect of all violations of all rights, but it specifically works for particular kinds of rights, specifically focuses on political prisoners, torture, execution. Okay, and they don't believe that other rights are less important, but they just believe that in order to do good work, they need to limit their focus to those particular areas. And in the past, there has been some pressure on them to expand their work to include other civil and political rights, such as voting, censorship, poverty, hunger. So far, they've resisted. And basically, their belief is, and this is a quote, "If someone takes away your bread, he suppresses your freedom. But if someone takes your freedom, rest assured, your bread is threatened, because it no longer depends on you, but on the pleasure of your master." End quote. Okay, so that's how they justify their work specifically in terms of political freedom. Now, the second basic principle is that they focus on the individual prisoner. According to Amnesty International, it's not enough just to get general information, just to find out about general human rights violations, okay? They're particularly concerned about the names of individual people, individual prisoners, and specific details about each case. And this principle is exemplified in the basic structure of Amnesty International, which is the adoption group. And these adoption groups are made up of members of Amnesty International in a specific locale. For example, there might be an adoption group made up of Amnesty International members from one city, or state, or country, or even neighborhood. And these adoption groups take on specific prisoners' cases, so it's a very personal operation, rather than an abstract operation. So these particular adoption groups will have the name of the prisoner, information about his or her case, information about his or her condition, his or her family, and so on. And the adoption group writes letters, raises money, and does whatever it feels it can do to help this one prisoner. Okay, the third principle of Amnesty International is that all action is grounded in fact. And part of the reason for this is that they recognize that in order to take action, it is necessary to have reliable information. In order to be respected, you need to have reliable information. So at the heart of their activities is good research. They conduct fact-finding missions to countries to find out the truth of what's going on. And most countries do let them in because they know that this is a fairly non-partial organization that is respected worldwide. And so it would look very bad in terms of worldwide opinion to not let them do research in a country. Okay, and Amnesty International is aware that its credibility rests on the reliability of its information. Okay, the fourth principle. Amnesty International is based on member participation. If you remember the second principle, I said that they are concerned with individual prisoners. Now, this fourth principle is concerned with their membership, okay? It says that it's the members, the individual members, that are very important. And I'm sure you've heard of top-heavy organizations in which all of the power really rests on the top level. Well, Amnesty International, you might call a bottom-heavy organization, because really, the key work is done by the members themselves. Okay, and as far as Amnesty International is concerned, the individual makes a difference. And so it's the effort of individuals that make up the organization. And they feel that without the efforts of these individual men and women, little would be accomplished. It's these people who take the actions, according to Amnesty International. If it were left solely to governments, human rights would not be protected. Okay, the fifth principle is moral suasion, or persuasion, with governments. Amnesty International is not a conflict-seeking organization. Rather, what they like to do is initiate dialogue with the governments, with the people involved. They'd rather point to a better way rather than punish the government. Okay? So therefore, they don't urge the isolation of a government, or they don't urge economic sanctions, or any kind of punishment against a country. Rather, what they want is they want dialogue, they want feedback, and they want some action. Okay? The sixth point. And the sixth one, I think, is very, very important for an international organization. And that is that it's strictly impartial in all of its work. As far as Amnesty International is concerned, wherever men and women are deprived of their freedom, or their right to not be tortured, or their right to life, that's where they will go. It doesn't matter if the country is capitalist, communist, religious, non-religious. It doesn't matter. So as far as they're concerned, there is no other consideration to be taken into account when these rights are being violated. Okay? And that helps because that way, if you're a communist country, you don't need to feel that this is a capitalist organization. A capitalist country doesn't feel that it's a communist organization. Very impartial. And in order to keep this impartiality, Amnesty International refuses to compare or rank countries. So they don't compare countries. They don't rank countries. And they feel that there's no use in saying X is better than Y when they're talking about human rights. Okay, another important consideration, another important principle, is that Amnesty International is fully independent in policy and finances. This is the seventh principle. It has no links. State, political bodies, religious bodies, it has no links to anyone except its membership. And there are certain rules that Amnesty International has adopted to protect its independence. For example, if an Amnesty International member occupies a high post in a government, he or she cannot occupy a high post in Amnesty International, because that would, or could, be a conflict of interests. As another example of laws Amnesty International has taken to protect its independence is the fact that no Amnesty International group can work for prisoners in its own country. For example, if I'm in an adoption group in the United States, I can't work on behalf of American prisoners. I might work on behalf of prisoners in other countries. Who would work for prisoners in the United States? Amnesty International members from other countries. Remember, there are members in over 160 countries. In this way, again, there are no conflicts of interest. Okay, finally, all finances. This is still part of the seventh principle. All finances come from subscriptions or contributions of members. Amnesty International doesn't take any grants from any governments, and they don't take any gifts that have any kind of strings attached, any conditions that are inconsistent with the organization's goals. Okay, and finally, the last one is that a basic belief of Amnesty International is that all people have a responsibility in terms of human rights. What does this mean? It means that according to Amnesty International, geography, political frontiers have nothing to do with human rights violations. So we can't just say, oh, that's going on in another country. It's none of my business. We have to realize that what is going on in other countries, if it's a human rights violation, is our business. They believe that human rights are the birthright of every individual, and that it's the duty of every person then to seek the defense of those rights whenever they're violated. Okay? And they believe that non-interference is just as bad as acceptance. Okay, so you can see that these 8 principles have helped Amnesty International to survive since the early 1960s, to grow to a membership of over 1 million, and to gain very, very high international respect. Quite an achievement.